Hey, I have a game here from the Lichess 45-45 League, played between Ming Pro on the white side and Rat River Trapper, who is in my team. Patzers, or alternatively, maybe in the future, is going to be called Petrosian's Patzers. Maybe that's too long. I don't know. We'll settle on a different name. In any case, I asked my teammates for some games maybe that would be interesting to look at and pick apart. And one of the first contributions, suggestions was this game by Rat River Trapper. He played a pretty good opening on the black side here, as Sicilian unfolded itself into an endgame, and I would say in the current position we're seeing on the board, he has the better side of it, seeing as his pieces look a lot more active than their counterparts. At the same time, the pawns look a bit more disjointed on the black side, so that is something that needs to be addressed, but there's still some tension going on, and resolving that will probably have an effect of restoring the balance there. And it seems likely from this position that maybe black doesn't have a winning advantage, but it seems likely that he can make his advantage felt. So we joined the game after 26 moves. Interesting queen trade just happened. And in this position, black played sort of a logical move in rook b8. But it would have been far more logical, in my opinion, to play c takes b2. And a very logical move here would be to take with the king, although a pawn like this can often be like a shield, because black pieces can't be penetrating this this line anymore. It can work to the detriment of black attack. Although sometimes if this pawn gets guarded by another pawn, for instance here, and you can get a knight to this square, for instance, then this can also lead to a mating attack, because of course the pawn does control some squares around the king. But there are some situations, and this might be one of them, that just playing a rook move, either one of these, might be interesting as well, and just letting the pawn sit there. So a sample line could be something like, oh, skipped ahead accidentally there. A sample line could be something like this, where if you move the king up, that would be very scary, and just d5 would work here, or rook c3 check, after which, well, mate is on the cards with this move. And that is impossible to stop, it seems. So that really goes to show how piece activity, better piece activity can make itself felt. Of course, in this position, king has to be played back to the corner. But that still lends itself to tactical opportunity, because this piece is beautiful. There's some pressure here. These pawns are disjointed. At some point, maybe the rook can go here, put some pressure. This rook can put more pressure here. I mean, there's a lot of good possibilities. In any case, rook b8 was played, and b3. Now, this is also an interesting point to just appreciate for a moment. Pawns like these, or alternatively, in this situation on the a3 square, they act as thorns. They're often called thorns. Let me get rid of some of these arrows, because although white has made some time, has taken some time to make some luft, some escape room for his king, that is taken away by pawns like these. So this reintroduces back rank attacks and mates. And yeah, these pawns can be a real nuisance. This, however, gets resolved with the a4 and the exchange on b3, which follows quickly. And of course, taking with the a pawn would is the alternative here, but it is not very attractive, especially because doubling on the a file would be very challenging to meet, to say the least. Just plain uncomfortable for white. If you can imagine a bishop, for instance, sitting here, that would also be devastating. So instead, white took with the c-pawn, of course, and now suddenly, well, there are three pieces of whites which can attack this black pawn, and this black pawn at the same time is now, a bit more vulnerable. Of course, this is a long-term asset, and it's only 2 squares away from promoting, but that is not really happening in the near future. So often these kind of pawns, like a lot of things in chess, they have their advantages and disadvantages. Of course, it's a pawn that's very far along and is likely to promote at some point. Well, I should maybe say that a bit more cautiously. It's very near promotion, but at the same time, it's also relatively vulnerable. And d4, as you will see in the game, has its own disadvantages because d4 was played directly after this move, but to my eyes, rook b4 is a lot more logical here. Further activating the rook, it's a typical rook endgame move, this move, rook b4, and at the same time putting pressure here that's awkward to meet, because if, for instance, rook h1 needs to be played, then, well, you're taking away some pressure here. Yeah, that's one point, but the other point is that, yeah, defending this pawn, however logical it is not what you want your rook doing. You would much rather have this rook, if you can put it anywhere, like put it somewhere along the 7th rank or something, or, well, yeah, just put it somewhere more active. So rook b4 would have been I think an improvement over d4. d4 is also not strictly necessary, and pushing pawns like that always has disadvantages as well. It takes away control over these squares, but there's just one attacker here and one defender, and usually you want to over-defend stuff. That's a reasonable strategy that was first advocated, I think, by Nimzowitsch with the idea of prophylaxis, but right now it's not really feasible in the near future. Yeah, there's always 2 moves to attack that a second time. So, for instance, you have to move the bishop somewhere, let's say bishop c4, and only then you can add the second attacker. So there's always a move extra to prepare for that, and you can maybe even decide that you don't want to defend this pawn, but you would rather counterattack one of the opponent's pawn, although this pawn might be worth a lot to defend. Of course, it depends on the concrete position. Also, one of the pieces that can attack this pawn is the king, and if the king attacks it from the front, then of course you're blocking the rook. So okay, these are all very concrete, simple things. I won't go too much more into depth about that. All right, so bishop e4 was played after d4, which is logical, making use of the fact that the e4 square has become available. And rook d8, I mean, it seems to be a necessity, but rook b4 is also still interesting, although much less interesting than a couple of moves earlier, because the scope of this rook has become significantly diminished with the 2 pieces in a way. But of course, if we're talking about the classic rules in endgames and rook endgames, then putting the rooks behind your passed pawns seems like a great idea. But in this concrete situation, white has the pawns firmly blockaded, especially if he, with the situation he gets into in the game. And then, yeah, at this point you just seem to be drifting a bit. And meanwhile, white is really getting his act together and is exploiting his chance to get firmly back into the game. And after the exchanges that happen here, it looks like white is in the driver's seat. I am not a big fan of f4 because it once again gives up control over some squares. But yeah, let's take stock here for a little moment, because the last moment of the three big moments of attention in this game that I want to get into is coming up. But there are some key aspects to understand here. Of course, there's different colored bishops, and in these opposite colored bishop endings, it is important on what color your pawns are. And of course, the white light square bishop can take on these pawns. At the same time, the dark square bishop can maybe one day take this pawn, but that is less likely, especially because the bishop has to guard this diagonal, seeing as otherwise these pawns will just stomp on and score a touchdown. But there's a particular aspect that we'll see in the game that this bishop can't so easily just collect these pawns and or alternatively force the black king into passivity. So f4 I'm not a big fan of, although I understand that it's putting a pawn on a dark square and is making it impossible for the white light square bishop to ever attack it. I appreciate that, but at the same time it does give the important e4 square, and sometimes you don't mind so much. I mean, it's all about concrete situations, but sometimes you don't mind so much to have that one aspect of vulnerability, that your pawn is on a light square, but it's much more important to deny activity. All right, so this is all semi-logical, and here, although white is for choice, and white is more active and has better chances, especially once he gets a good blockade going here and can get this king in. h6 spoils most of the chances for a draw here. Better was king f8, and let's say after just bishop d5 going to e4, king e7, then bishop g8 is nothing to worry about. This is something that is difficult to see ahead of time, but it's a concrete theme to remember. Often, I think a very famous example is probably the second game of Fischer-Spassky, the famous world chess championship. That bishops like these can become trapped, and of course here the game would turn into black's favor. So that is something that can come up repeatedly. But let's say if white doesn't go for that, instead moves his king, then he also always has to worry about black just pushing the pawn. So in concrete terms, let's see if black just pushes his king to become more active and also deny the d5 square. Then you might say, well, h5 is interesting, but there's not much to worry about here, unless you go h4, which is just losing to g6, but you can bring the king closer with an active move, and just if white pushes, you can hold it, and you probably even have the better chances here. But more logical would have been just some form of repetition. There's not much to do here. Black bishop's just guarding here. White king can never enter. Bishop can never get here. And if either side just wants to get ahead, they have to give up something. So here, both players are holding each other in their grip, so to say. So it's like it's stalemate more in the sense of I would say there's a better word for that. There's just no chance to get ahead for either side. So in any case, after h6 it's pretty much lost, because the exchange of these pawns just makes g6 a lot more vulnerable, and makes it so that the black king has to babysit it, and once the white king can come in, it's not even worth bothering with picking up that pawn for white, just pushing the pawn. Make sure that yeah, black has no chances at all anymore. So basically there's 3 moments here. Last chance was h6. That was a mistake at this moment. King f8 should have been played. Before that, I would definitely say rook b4. That is the better try. And yeah, here of course the increased activity is something that that is giving black a noticeable advantage. And the first moment at the beginning of the endgame was definitely to take on b2. Alright, so I hope that gives you some interesting points to take with you, Rat River Trapper, and other people who might be watching. Hope you have a great day.